how can we make education more inclusive? The answer is make it more accessible. Have digital learning be a part of the basic basket of essential services for every child.
This is the high time that we start focusing on the overall development of the student. We help them in building skills such as communication, leadership, problem solving, critical thinking, which are the core of surviving in the corporate world.
I would also really like to see a system that on one hand teaches creativity, adaptability, problem solving, leadership, self-reflection and awareness, and on the other hand, less lofty but equally important life skills like cooking or managing one's finances or carpentry or farming.
So many seats are granted to SCs, STs and OBCs that the more deserving students never even stand a chance. There must be equality in education.
We cannot be coloring within the lines and compartmentalize education in grades, streams and economic strata. Knowledge needs to be assessed and nurtured on multiple levels and not just one.
If the pandemic has shown us anything at all, it is that work and the manner in which we approach it can change virtually overnight. Flexibility therefore becomes a highly prized skill. And so, in looking at Education 2030, for example, OECD has identified flexibility and lifelong learning as two core skills that every individual must possess. On the learning side, or on the school side, we believe, for instance, at ACER, that every individual student travels an individual learning path. This in turn means that school systems, and indeed college systems, will need to become far more flexible in the way in which they approach curriculum and the teaching learning process.
Through the Futures of Education initiative, UNESCO has been leading the global debate on how knowledge and learning need to be reimagined in a world of increasing complexity and uncertainty. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, it is clear that our response must include low-tech and high-tech scenarios to ensure that the most marginalized, particularly girls, can continue learning. An education of the future must also evolve on content, including a central focus on a core set of universal values. Our biology textbooks must teach gender equality, as must our history textbooks foster leadership skills. Finally, to navigate the rapid advancements in technology, we must support learners to deal effectively with change and to remain flexible.
Self-directed learning is going to be very important, which means that foundational skills, basic skills like the ability to read, write, do some arithmetic, access information from the internet are going to become important.
From startups with foresight to new innovations in the field of VR-fueled education and changes planned in current education systems, education is set to undergo a paradigm shift in the post-pandemic world and in the years to come. Can future policies pave a way for change? And, if indeed they can, will blended learning stay as a game changer wherein education can actually impart life skills, mental sustenance, and awareness about global issues to large tracts of students with targeted outreach plans rather than center around prescribed and time-honored syllabi? Time is ripe for us to take a good look at our education systems and ask what is their real purpose. Imparting knowledge, increasing employability, or creating well-rounded, kinder, and thinking adults. In ancient times, Plato's academy taught a range of topics such as philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, politics, physics, and more. And it was all part of the Platonic philosophy. Interestingly, now some private universities are again focusing on the liberal arts that cover humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and formal sciences. Can we start relooking at education's larger goals in the midst of our bid to equip children for the rat race? Join us, along with our diverse panel of experts, to explore these topics in greater detail. Be inspired. Reimagining education for an inclusive future. Atishi Marlena and Bikkrama Daulet Singh in conversation with Sarah Jacob. Atishi is the architect behind the Delhi education revolution, which has given 16 lakh children the opportunity to realize their full potential, irrespective of their family's socio-economic background. She is currently the chairperson of 3 Delhi Assembly committees: the Committee on Ethics, the Committee on Environment, and the Standing Committee on Education. Bikkrama Daulet Singh is co-managing director at Central Square Foundation, a non-profit organization striving to ensure quality school education in India with a focus on foundational learning. Singh is one of the leading expert voices in school education reform in India. His expertise in school education spans across foundational literacy and numeracy, edtech, and India's private school sector. Sarah Jacob is a journalist and the anchor of We the People, one of NDTV's flagship programs that airs at the prime time of 9:30 p.m. every Sunday. Previously, Sarah has been the US correspondent for the group. She has covered both the 2008 and 2012 presidential elections. As a reporter, Sarah has worked extensively in the fields of health and education and the environment. As you listen to our speakers, do remember we have an ongoing audience poll. Click on the poll button on your screen, answer the questions, and let's find out what you think about the views being aired on the show.
With the extreme hardship that the pandemic has unleashed, it's hard to think of silver linings. But as it is with all disruptions, it forces us to rethink life as we know it, question whether current models still serve us or whether there's a better way that we can emerge from this crisis. And, reimagining education for an inclusive future. I think this is a watershed moment for all of us right now to also see whether we can do that for education too, education which has taken a huge hit over the past 2 years, and whatever model we embrace, can we ensure that it is an inclusive model for all? Atishi, to you first, the big learnings from the pandemic over the past 2 years for education and senior education, higher education.
What the past year and a half has done has brought forward the divides that already existed. So the fault lines that already existed within our education system have just become far more apparent. I think there is inequity in our education system is something that we have all known. Almost across the country, people are looking to shift their children from government schools to private schools. Anyone who gets access to a greater cash inflow, more money coming in per month, looks to send at least their sons, whom they regard as their future primary earning member, into private schools. Over the last 6 years in Delhi, at least, this is something that we have been looking to turn around. And in terms of making education equitable and making sure that government schools have the same kind of quality education that you get in good private schools. The issue, however, is that with the pandemic, this access, in terms of access to education, which was provided by actually coming physically into schools, that question of access has really been brought forward once again. And I would say that in the last 30 years, India had been looking to address access question and had made substantial gains in that. If you were to look in the early 90s, only about 60% of the child population actually went to school, and almost 40% of children were out of school. Then for the last 3 decades, there have been a lot of efforts via the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, many campaigns like we have heard on FM radio throughout the country, these School Chale Hum jingles. And as a consequence, now 95% of children were actually going into school. The issues that we were looking to address was the learning outcomes of children, because we had gone past that question of access. We now assume that all children do come into school. Now you have to make sure that whether they come into government schools, private schools, budget private schools, they all have high quality education. Now with the pandemic and access to education being via technology, We are almost back by a few decades, and we are back again to the question of access. I mean, just in Delhi alone, for example, and I'll share some data, and this is Delhi, this is not the rural hinterland of the country, this is the national capital. In government schools, in standard 8, only 60% of children had smartphones in their home. In class 10, that number is 73% of children have access to smartphones. And I think so in 10, 11, that number goes up to about 80%. But on an average, if we were to see, only 68% children had access to smartphones. And this is not their personal smartphones. This is one smartphone in the family. Second, broadband access to children in lower middle class, low income communities is extremely low. So if you were to ask me, when we look into the future of education, technology is not what I would be talking about. Because I think that in terms of equitable access to technology, I think we are still very, very long way to go. What I do think in terms of looking forward to the future is that this 1.5 year gap and our compulsion to push forward and promote all children, be it in class 10, class 12, etc., is also a good opportunity for us to relook at what is it that we are teaching in our schools. And I think that is the question that we fundamentally need to look at. Because, when you look at school education, and I often ask this question when I speak on education, like, when was the last time that you or I used quadratic equations? It was probably when we were studying quadratic equations in school. Most of our life has gone by, and we can say that we are all reasonably successful professionals. We have never needed to use quadratic equations in our lives, right? Never have I needed to know what are the minerals that are found in Nigeria or even the Chota Nagpur Plateau, for example. And yet, we spent a good part of our school education, and children still spend a good part of their years in school learning all this information that is increasingly available at the click of a button. So I think that when we are looking into the future, the question is really about what is it that we teach in schools? How is it that we teach in schools? Rather than a question of technology with technology, without technology, blended learning, because I think that that is not the main issue that is going to resolve the future of equitable education.
Absolutely. Again, like I said, we're really at a watershed moment. And can we use this to move forward into a system that we can embrace, that works for us, not just depend on our traditional, syllabi, repetitive rote learning, etc. What do we need to look at? Bikkrama just set this up for us. Traditional brick and mortar service delivery models have been disrupted across sectors. But in education, what have been the lessons from the pandemic for you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And I think some of the themes I'm going to talk to, I think in a way, lead directly from some of the experience that Atishi and I think the Delhi government has had while it's sort of been trying to reform the school education sector. I think in order to set it up, I think first I want to just say that, look, there are many Indias, and both the destination and the pathway to reform differs. And I know we like to, in a way, many times try and sort of bring it all down to, what is the inherent challenge in the school education space. And I honestly feel a lot of the dialogue and the voice is around really problems that children like our children face, around, how do we get them ready for the 21st century? How do we get them build grit and thinking capabilities and collaboration? And these are, of course, very, very important things. But ultimately, these represent issues of all children in 20,000 CBSE and international schools of this country, right? And which, in accumulation may have 2 million children. We've got 250 million children in across the school system. And actually, what doesn't get enough recognition is what is the crux of the problem that these children are facing. And, Central Square Foundation has been working for over a decade on school education reform. And, we went through our own journey of trying to sort of really, really unpack, the nature of this problem. And where eventually the data and evidence led us to, Sarah, was that almost half our children do not even learn to read with comprehension. And I think the best definition of this is the World Bank's Learning Poverty Index, which measures the percentage of children in a country that read with comprehension at age 10. And India in 2017, this is government data, was suffering from 54% learning poverty. That's more than half the children in age 10 cannot read with comprehension. Our neighbor Sri Lanka was under 20%, 14, 15%. China was in that range as well. Look, and all data and evidence now tells us that if a child does not learn to read with comprehension, even actually closer to age 8, grade 3, grade 4, their learning trajectory just flattens. And what happens is that they're just getting seat time. So I'm not surprised the data that sort of emerged in the Delhi government schools of children sitting in grade 8 and grade 9 and eventually not even having foundational learning skills. So the only way to deal with this problem is to go upstream and actually ensure that children get to read with comprehension by grade 3, age 8, so that they sort of in the end can sort of, as learning moves from sort of oral to reading, they can sort of then, flow up with the tide and actually follow the curriculum. So I think the big problem is around foundational learning. For a long time, I think a lot of policymakers did not even acknowledge that. I think they looked at it as one of the many problems the school education space is facing. But I think the emphasis of many organizations, including CSF, Pratham, I think efforts of Delhi government, I think just try to push the conversation that, look, unless you fix that, everything we're doing downstream is just repair work. Are you in the prepare business or in the repair business? So I think there's been a lot, thankfully, I think there's been a lot of movement on that. When the new national education policy came out, I think the committee that built the NEP was very data driven, and they actually they in a way realized that, look, if India is sort of really going to build this this knowledge economy on the top of this demographic dividend, we have to equip our children with the skills that they can actually build on. So they put foundational learning as a number one priority in the new national education policy. It was the only thing in the national education policy that even called for a mission to be launched, put a deadline, and so on. And I think again, some of the tailwinds is that during 2 months ago, the Ministry of Education launched Nipun Bharat, which is a dedicated scheme around foundational learning, which carved out nearly 15,000 crores over the next 5 years. So at least the government now is signaling, the MOE is signaling to all state governments, this matters, and we're making some money available for you to now design holistic, meaningful program. So as I reflect on the pandemic, like I always say that, look, it gave an opportunity for two things, right? One, it gave us an opportunity to experiment and do innovative things. And I will talk about some of those things as we go ahead in this conversation, which I think we need to sort of not just drop as we go back to schools. We need to, in some sense, integrate that and, take some of those experiments that, in a way added value and which are scalable, not just for pockets of students who have digital devices and connectivity. But the second thing also the pandemic did is, in a way, really reflect on where you are. Where is the school education sector? What is the data telling us? So I mean, my main thrust is, as we reopen, we need to now go really after this challenge of halving learning poverty. By the end of the decade, by 2030, can we bring down learning poverty to about 25% from over 50% now? There is, in a way, now the models, the evidence that can at least give us some hope that this change is possible. But this is only going to happen if this becomes like the number one priority for policymakers and for education bureaucrats. It can't be 1 out of the 10 things that they're doing when they sort of come into office and design their programs.
Atishi, would you agree? Bikkrama and you are saying that India was reeling under an acute learning crisis even before this pandemic. This pandemic has only exacerbated that crisis. There's a foundational problem in our education system. And on top of that, we now have 2 batches who have entered. Their first exposure to the education system has been via screens. But Bikkrama is saying if you need an external factor to make that big leap, maybe it needs to be something like technology. He seems to be saying that we can't, as students slowly return to school, just move back to the old system. Perhaps we have to go hand in hand with the technological aspects that we've introduced over the last 2 years. Would you agree? What's next as students return to schools? Learning by screen or remote learning, will that continue to play a major role even after schools are able to reopen? Should it play a major role? Is digitization of education the future, even though right now we know it does not reach the majority of Indian students?
So I think, Sarah, when we say that will be continued digital learning, we assume the fact that children do have access to digital learning. I think that the reality of things is that I have a niece and nephew who go into a high-end, well-known private school in the city. And so yes, while they have missed out on learning by socialization, in terms of their academic learning, they have not missed anything through the course of the pandemic. On the other hand, if you were to look at a median child, not even the lowest end of the spectrum of the children who are coming into the public education system, into government schools of similar age groups, they are usually living in a house that does not have more than 2 rooms per se. So there is no question of the fact that, and not more than 1 digital device. So if there are 2 children of a similar school going age, there is a good chance that they have had access to about 30 to 40% of the online classes that have been going on through the past year and a half. So when we say that will digital learning continue, I think that already has the assumption that children had access to digital learning. Whereas I personally believe that most of them did not. And so for children who are first generation learners coming from low income communities, access to the physical infrastructure of the school, we have to realize that over the past 3 decades, this mindset has been adequately built. You may be coming from any socio-economic class, but now that your children go to school, both boys and girls, that they will go to school into that physical space and learn is something that has been well established in everyone's minds. It would be very rare where we find instances that children are now pulled out of school or do not even go to school in the first place. So I think that in terms of access to learning, whether we are looking at the future, definitely schools, physical learning, etc. has to be there. And I am talking about Delhi. I mean, this is and if this is the condition in Delhi, then what is going on in rural areas of India remains to be seen. I think that where we should be looking at when we talk about the future of education, I personally think we spend too much time talking about technology, whereas I think that the future of education does not lie as much in technology as in rethinking what we are doing in schools. You do have a situation in our country of rising unemployment numbers. And the problem is that you have a very large segment of the population who are unemployable. Yeah. Why? Because our education system, despite getting them into schools, has not even been able to teach them the basics. And I think that the ASAL survey every year brings that out to us, that children don't even know how to read and write. In some ways, I think Delhi government is one of the first governments that has taken it head on, that you had the education minister, the deputy chief minister, come on air, even on FM ads, and say the fact out loud that 75% kids in class 6 do not know how to read their textbooks. And that we need your help, and everyone needs to come together if we have to resolve this. So foundational learning skills have to form the basis of the way forward in terms of education. The biggest challenge in that is actually the mindset of the entire education system, be it teachers, principals, educational administrators, that you have to complete the curriculum is something that is almost now in the DNA of all sections of our education system. Second, what needs to change is what is it that we are teaching in schools apart from foundational learning skills. I think that there is a very serious need to rethink the amount of information and subject knowledge that we are giving children, especially given the fact that we now live in an era where access to information is very different from what it was even when all of us were going into school. Now all children can have access to it, like young people, children, adults can have access to that information within seconds. So what do we need to be teaching in schools? Number one, I think there's a strong focus needed on socio-emotional learning. And I think that is a very important piece that has been much neglected. And I think that, I personally see just from my own experience is that, we spend almost 18 years through the education system, school, higher undergraduate degrees, etc. And you learn so much information that you never need for the rest of your life. But the important things that you do need, that you struggle with on a daily basis, like a sense of self-confidence, a sense of self-assurance, how to interact with people, how to build relationships, how to work in teams, how to work with subordinates, how to work with your bosses. None of these things are taught to us or even discussed in the 18 years that we spend in the education system. And I think that really, and we all as adults, we fall, we trip, we learn, we the amount of mental health issues that almost all adults in modern society as a whole face is because that has never been the focus of learning. We have been making attempts through the happiness curriculum that we have started in our schools over the last few years. And I think so that socio-emotional learning is a very important part of education. Second, collaborative action. That how is it that groups of people, because even when we live in society as a whole, the education system pushes you currently to this individual-based testing, whereas most problems that exist in society require to be solved in groups, teams, and collaboratively. So I think collaborative problem solving of real world problems, that I think is the second major focus area of the issues in question. And I think that really needs to be, to me, directionally, I would say three things: foundational learning, socio-emotional education, and collaborative problem solving. These three really form the direction of the future.
So let me pick up first on what she talked about. How can Bikkrama, we use this as a pivoting moment to move forward? How can we make our education actually impart life skills, a mental sustenance? How can we use this moment not just to impart knowledge and increase employability, but also create well-rounded, kinder thinking adults?
So, Sarah, I want to, as we look ahead, I think the two themes I want to definitely talk about, one is edtech and digital learning, and the other is the role of the private sector. There's a lot of hype around edtech in India, and, there are some companies with multi-billion-dollar valuations. I think what a lot of people don't realize is all the innovation in edtech is focused on India one. What we call this target group of 20-30 million students at most, out of the larger group of 250 million students, right? And all these solutions are basically built in English. They're very high cost. I mean, subscription rates of Byju's and solutions like that are in the range of 20,000-25,000 rupees a year. They're not very affordable. A lot of them, are direct to home. They're, sold to in some sense, the payer is the household, and because, they're basically assuming that those income levels exist. I think the bet which CSF and some of our partners is taking, that can we look at harnessing edtech for what we call India 2 and India 3? Is there really a vaccine can be developed that can get children to foundational learning by working on some effective solutions? And there are two problems, and and Atishi is obviously pushing us in the right direction. That first you have to get the vaccine, then you have to think of how am I going to get the vaccine to all students. But even the R&D effort upfront is important. Now the challenge really also is that, look, sometimes, okay, you can say if I can build a vaccine, but I can only get it to 100 people, what is the use of that? So what we are trying to do in a way is that, CSF and a few partners are trying to create sort of different, versions of a vaccine, which can eventually potentially have immense scale. And I'll give you two examples. We have an organization that we are supporting called Rocket Learning, which basically came on this insight, which is very powerful, that WhatsApp is the primary communication channel used by households. The 68% household that Atishi said have smartphones, they're using WhatsApp. So they built the entire learning solution around WhatsApp. And the second key insight they had is that this learning needs to be nudged by the teacher, but it's an automated bot. So it doesn't put an additional burden on the teacher. So you go home, you do extra homework, you receive videos, you receive practice. And this is now being evaluated, randomized through a randomized controlled trial in UP. Highly scalable, because what a lot of people don't realize is that one of the legacies of COVID is that almost even states like UP, 90% of teachers in UP are now connected with the parents of their children through WhatsApp. So, so the digital architecture has been created, so solutions like this can sort of also work. There's another solution we're working on called Sarthi, which is looking at offline worksheets delivered to households. Because they know that, look, if you don't have digital, you don't actually have the device, can actually deliver worksheets to homes, which can, and then, through RMs, relationship managers, call them to address doubts and to nudge them to finish these worksheets. So they're different sort of, that's what I'm trying to say, there's a continuum in edtech, completely high tech, something offline and, online, kind of a combination. And some of this is all being built for what I call India 2, India 3. This is being built for scale. This is being for low-income households. We still have a way off until we can scale this statewide. Things like Rocket Learn can potentially be scaled statewide. Solutions like Sarthi will take some time. But I would say, look, this innovation effort is important, because if you don't invest now, even 3 to 5 years from now, you won't have that scalable vaccine to actually administer to all these students. And I think it's a hedge. If nothing else, it can supplement better classroom instruction. Learning levels in private schools are not much better than the government school sector, because in a way, a lot of the regulatory structure today is set up to hold them accountable to inputs, not to outcomes. And so I think as we reopen and look at the future of this of school education, we really need to look at how we can, in a way, orient the private school sector to deliver outcomes. And that's going to require reforms of a very different type. You need to change the regulatory structure. You need to change transparency around learning levels. And you need to, in a way, create incentives for a lot of sort of large chains of private schools to set up to deliver quality.
So, all right, Bikkrama, I think we're agreeing then that the conventional classroom teaching with human contact is still the best mode of learning, but technology is a great enabler. It could have a multiplier force if utilized, if harnessed, if optimized. So it can't just be technology substituting schools or replacing teachers. A solution is teachers and technology, really. But Atishi, the other issue when we talk about outcomes is assessment. How do you see assessment and testing changing in the future?
Unless you change how you test, we are never going to be able to reform what we are doing in our classrooms, because assessment and testing leading to classroom practices is the norm in India. And it's a classic case of the tail wagging the dog. But as long as one keeps having standardized tests, which test for how much information you know, there is no way one can get out of the practice of rote learning in the classroom. And I think that the idea of this 3-hour test at the end of a year, where you learn, where you rote learn, and you literally go and sorry for the use of a crass term, but you literally go and puke it out and then you forget about it for the rest of your lives, is something that really has to change if children need to learn anything. And I think that for us in Delhi, this is the reason why we are looking to start our own board. We have recently launched something called the Delhi Board of Secondary Education, where gradually over the next few years, these are the experiments and directionally where we want to take assessment, where in an ongoing basis, you're able to assess where the child actually stands. And assessment over time becomes a tool for the teacher to reframe how they are teaching, because assessment is really about the teacher to understand where the child stands and therefore how they should be teaching differently to make sure that the child actually learns. We need to also get out of this mindset that the test or assessment is this almost judgment on the students, that they're standing at the gates of heaven, deciding whether they'll be sent into heaven or given entry into hell, which is what the assessment system currently really is. And the shift needs to happen, that assessment needs to be continuous and be seen as a tool for the teacher and the education system as to how we need to transform what we are doing to make sure that every child actually learns.
Well, Bikkrama, then if you have to take assessment and make it change and adapt, that would require teachers then to also change and adapt. And does that mean we have to retrain our teachers? The traditional role of teachers also has been disrupted over the past 2 years. What is the role of training for teachers going forward if you want to get an education system that is inclusive and reaches out to everyone?
So I think what is starting to happen now after the new national education policy is at least there's some consolidation of the assessment architecture that India should sort of follow as they go ahead. One of the sort of critical elements of this is the National Achievement Survey that happens every 2 years, and for the first time this time it's going to be happening across government and private schools. It's a sample-based survey, and in a way it's the health report card of India, and it even feeds into the World Bank's Learning Poverty Index, and so it's quite a critical sort of assessment. The second thing which I think the National Education Policy mentions, which is going to be taken forward, is something called SAFL, which is a key stage exam. Many countries around the world have this, where they say, look, instead of testing all students multiple times a year, let's just test them at critical junctures of their school trajectory. End of grade 3, end of grade 5, end of grade 8. And these aren't board exams. These are competency-based tests. And that's where actually, once, and, in a way, and again, these have to be done across government and private schools. And this will give a signal to the entire system on what are our children learning at the end of primary. If a key stage exam, for example, existed in Delhi, there would be a lot more accountability on municipal schools on where the children are leaving their schools and going into Delhi government schools. Today, that doesn't exist. So a lot of them don't even learn how to read. I think on teacher training, again, I would say that, look, the offline mode of teacher training is completely broken in India, Sarah. And, if you ever attend a sort of a teacher training that's been designed by master trainers and designed and put together by the SCRTs and state governments, it's, no one wants to attend those trainings, and it's just check the box and using budgets. So edtech is really, in fact, even more ahead there on teacher training, on online teacher training than it is on student learning. Because as you've seen, learning has moved all online, and working with an adult is of course easier than working with a student. And there've been a lot of models now of teacher training. In fact, there was one of our partners that developed a series of modules around teacher training, very bite-sized, not the the long side MOOCs that no one finishes, but very activity-based, bite-sized modules through an organization called Teacher App. And over 500,000 teachers have till date, taken these courses. So I really feel that all of teacher training, the mode of teacher training is going to move online. Now, of course, the content of that training also needs to change. I feel right now, a lot of experts that we work with diagnose the problem around teacher training that it's very content heavy. It's not practice heavy. It tells teachers on what children should be taught or learn, but not about how they should deliver. So there is a lot of reform on teacher training and teacher practice that's likely. One of the things that we feel very optimistic about is the idea of giving a teacher manual. There are textbooks in classrooms around the country, but teachers don't have a manual, because what do I do day to day? How do I transact that textbook? And so some state governments are now starting to look at a sort of a teacher manual, which will at least give a guide to a teacher on, okay, how do you introduce a concept? What is the example you give? What is the practice you administer? And so I really think that, teacher training is, of course, going to teacher training and teacher practice is the core of reform. But again, there we need to look anew at, you harnessing the tools of technology, but also looking at new pedagogical approaches like, structured pedagogy and giving out teacher manuals.
All right. It said that nothing changes unless everything changes, and everything has changed over the last 2 years. And all aspects of learning have been tested: the format of instruction, attendance, evaluation, role of technology, human interaction. All of that is being reimagined. I think the silver lining here is that stakeholders like you, all of us, are at least addressing the problems, striving to address these challenges, understand them, and plug the gap. So here's to more conversations like this, and using this moment to pivot to an education system that we want and that works for all of us. Thank you all.
An idea can change the world. All we need is passion, focus, and a desire to help. If you have an idea, please send it to us at whatever stage it is in. Our panel of experts will assess it and help propel it towards reality. The sky is your limit. Don't wait. Mail us your idea or innovative thought at beinspired@teamworkarts.com.